And there's a bar.
Ready, George?
Yeah.
Okay. Since we premiered here in Melbourne George's last film, Diary of the Dead, I'd like to start with that and to ask George how, in one sense, that film took him back to his first film, To Night of the Living Dead, in many sense, and how it relates itself to the rest of the Dead cycle.
Well, it was sort of a throwback in many ways. I mean, it's a much smaller film. I think its personality resembles Night more than it does any of the other Dead films that I did. And it was also just, it was small, it was very controllable. I had control over it because we did it on a very low budget. And that's the easiest way to, to get complete control. I mean, I wanted to go back to the first night. The film prior to that, the zombie film that I made right before that, was Land of the Dead, which had gotten very big and sort of wound up, smelling a bit of Hollywood, but it was for Universal, and actually they let me make the film that I wanted to make, so it wasn't like a bad experience in that way. It just, you have to meet a certain standard, you have to be competitive visually and have enough action in order to when you're working for a major studio. And I just really wanted to go back to the roots. I felt that it had gotten too big, and I just wanted to get back to the roots. And I had an idea that I wanted to do something about emerging media, and it just sort of all clicked in my head. It all came together. I said, well, if I can do that with young people, film students that have the equipment and are there on the very first night when the dead start waking up, and so it really was a flashback in many ways. I mean, the film itself, the fiction of it was, and also the experience of making it was.
You also said that in many instances that thematically you felt like you had reached an exploration of the Dead movies up to a certain point, that this whole idea of society and what society becomes, and you felt that you had to go back to the first day of the zombie output to get new creative themes.
Yeah, not so. I just didn't know where to go after Land of the Dead. I mean, I didn't want to go, beyond Thunderdome, and I felt that I had left that. The first 4 films have kind of a progression to them. Zombies are, the zombie society is developing a little bit. I don't want to say they're getting smarter, but they're remembering more, and they're organizing a little bit, or at least following the example in the last film of this leader, Big Daddy. And I just didn't know where to go, and I had left that last film sort of in with the human character in that film leaves them alone in the end, and I thought that they had reached some sort of
coexistence?
Yeah, coexistence, some kind of coexistence. So I just, this idea, I wanted to have people that were documenting what was happening, and I didn't think that these students would be going to class if it was 3 years into the phenomenon. So it just all fell into place. I said, well, I'll go back and go right back to the first night.
What's one of the many amazing things about the Dead films to me is that they are tapped in very specific reality, and they're always talking. George uses zombies to talk about the world and about what's happening. They're very rooted in their own present. And I remember visiting George while he was writing Land of the Dead, and the images of 9/11, the coverage of 9/11 was in the news, and he kept his television on while he was writing the script. So I want him to discuss a little bit his relationship with the news. Newscast and television and media is very present in his films, and it's always a kind of a suspiciousness towards it. So can you tell me creatively what it feeds, how it feeds you, and also your history with it?
Well, history. I mean, I learned I learned the very basics of how to work in this medium from in a film laboratory. When I got out of college, there was no such thing as a film school then, where you could actually get your hands on equipment. And the news was on film. I was at a school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and cities the size of Pittsburgh had film laboratories because there was no such thing as videotape yet. The news was on film. And so I hung around at these labs. The first job I ever had out of college was bicycling these newsreels around to TV stations in Pittsburgh. And I would hang out with the editors that were cutting the news, and I would see how they, would say, well, let's use this shot, let's use that shot, and there was a little something that wasn't exactly truthful about it. Even just the editors at the laboratory were picking the shots that they thought were the most dramatic or the best looking, instead of necessarily worried about the footage that would best tell the story. And then, of course, I might be jumping ahead on what you want to talk about, but we had a little production company. The way we started, a bunch of friends of mine and myself started a little production company to do commercials, industrial films, and like that. And one of the things that we did were political campaigns, and purely contract jobs. And which really turned me off to that too. And so I guess I had these influences that just said, man, this is pretty silly what's going on here. And so I've always sort of taken little swipes at the media, and at the same time it was very affecting. I mean, when in the first film I tried to make the last 15 minutes of the film, which I think are sort of the angriest parts of the film, I was really trying to make them look like newsreel footage. I was trying to be one of those guys, one of those shooters that was,
When you move the camera more, it gets
all handheld stuff, and really purposely trying to make it look that way. I don't in the new film. I guess I'm much more concerned about alternate media than the mainstream. I mean, maybe call me crazy, but I preferred it when there were, in the United States, there were 3 networks. And you knew that, maybe they were lying to you, maybe they were spinning, whatever, but at least you were getting information. My problem with what's happening in the blogosphere and on the internet is that it seems like it's just making everybody more tribal. People go to blogs where they already agree with the commentator. Everybody's a journalist these days, and it's not, it's less information than it is opinion. And it seems to be separating us more than joining us.
So it's not a democracy as it's been presented to be in the internet?
I mean, it's wide open in the sense that anybody can get up there and write, anything. But somebody could get on there and, with any kind of radical idea, and there's going to be 1 million people that, join up. If Hitler was around today, he wouldn't ever have to appear in the town square. He could just write a blog.
Well, besides tapping in a very specific reality of their present, George's films always been able to relate to their audience. And when I saw Diary before the film opened, I was very surprised at how in tune it seemed to me with a younger generation. I mean, much younger than I am. But he was talking about new media, but he was also talking to young people and relating to the way they communicate. And I'm curious to know how he developed that familiarity and how he worked on it. Not to look like grandfather telling the internet is bad, but talking on their own terms. No, because the movie is surprising that way.
I don't know. I guess you climb into whatever shoes you set for yourself. I have a lot of young friends. I have a daughter who maybe is here somewhere, 24, and you know we talk about things. And I didn't want to do it from that sort of third person. I wanted to sort of get in there, right, with those students, and not really that different from when I was a student. And I guess I'm still, I don't know, in some ways a big teenager, you know. Still having fun, playing around, and doing what I love doing, which is making film. And I'm still amazed that I'm sort of allowed to do that. And so I don't know. I didn't want to do a narrative about it from up here. I wanted to be right down in there with them. And you know, after taking a few whacks at the script, there are still some dialogue lines that people complain about, like
what?
There's a line that get out of Dodge, and everybody said, nobody says that. You know, that's not something young people say. He's probably right. It's an old, you know, Western movie line or something, but that's more John Ford than.
The film also talks about what it means to film horror, not film cinematic horror, but film the horror in reality. And it has a couple of lines on it, and it's something that you've confronted yourself through your career. What it means to, you know, shoot something, and when do you stop, and how does it?
Well, I've always shot fiction. I was never in a position, those days when I was hanging out in the lab, I was not the shooter. I wasn't out there, you know, shooting a war or, you know, crime scenes or anything like that. So I never firsthand had that experience of seeing something real that was very gruesome and being immune to it. But I've spoken to a couple of news camera people and still photographers that have, you know, just had to look at horrendous things and find that there's a kind of an immunity that happens. You know, it just becomes something that you look at. Tom Savini, an effects guy that made several, did all the mechanical and gore effects in several of my films, was a combat photographer in Vietnam. And we often talked about how, you know, he would talk about how you just get immune, you know, after a while. You're just looking at it the way you might look at this glass of water. It's just the subject of what you're shooting. So I referred to that, even though I never had any firsthand experience with it. The stuff that I shoot is fiction, and maybe there's an immunity that comes with that. But you know, that may be something that goes all the way back to comic books. You know, I grew up on EC comic books, and the gore stuff just used to make me giggle, man. I mean, it didn't turn me off at all. And I don't know, I think that, you know, I often say, like, Steve King and I go to see a horror movie, you know, that there are people throwing up, and we're just giggling, man, munching our popcorn. And I think it's just, you know, it's a factor of age and growing up on those old comic books. That was part of it. I mean, those comic books were all full of puns, and in a way, they were very sort of lighthearted. And also quite moral, you know. People got their comeuppance, and so I have never been offended by the gore sequences, or I've never sort of had to stop and say, well, am I going too far with this? I just never felt that I was. I did question whether I needed those sequences in some of the films, and originally I justified it by saying, well, it's kind of a slap in the face. It's you know, it's a wake-up call of some kind. It's like in Altman's original version of MASH. You know, you're laughing your ass off for 90 minutes, and then all of a sudden there's an operating room scene, and blood is squirting, and it's like a whoop. So I like the effect that it has, that shock effect that it has in the middle of what is otherwise, you know, more frivolous, more bawdy. But I've never sort of stopped myself from doing it.
Well, George is known, you know, everywhere as a quote-unquote master of horror, and I've done a lot of work about his films. And To me, it always strikes me how much more complicated his relationship is to the genre. I mean, I don't think of George as a straightforward horror director like many others. So, George, how do you see yourself in relation to the genre that you use so masterfully to discuss things that are very important to you that have nothing to do with horror?
Well, I mean, I guess my values are very old. I mean, again, when I was old enough to go to the movies alone, that's what I went to see, and some terrible stuff. But I also saw that right when I was at that age, they were re-releasing all the Universal films, Frankenstein, Dracula, which are beautiful films. I mean, very few people have seen those films big screen. They're gorgeous when you see them big screen. So I guess there was a little bit of that crept in, as well as just those traditional sort of campy, fun horror elements that I fell in love with. But I don't think of myself as purely like a horror guy. You sort of get typecast, you get sort of stuck. Those are the phone calls that I get. I've done a few other films in other genres, and they just haven't been as successful. Thank goodness, they're all sort of out now on video, and people are getting to see them. So it's wonderful to have this stuff still live. But I love the genre, and I've been able to sort of twist it into, I'm using it sort of my own way. I'm able to talk about what's happening out there in the world, and glue zombies on top of it. And get a production deal.
I lost my train of thought here. Yes, part of what he's talking about, it's also interesting to notice that some of George's early cinematic influences are, he mentioned the Universal horror, but two of the filmmakers he told me he loves the most, and that were most important in his early years, were Orson Welles and Michael Powell, which have nothing to do with the genre, or why they were so important. What was in Powell and Welles that was important to you?
It's all in what impresses you when you're at a certain age. That's really what it was. And I lived in New York. I grew up in New York City, and there used to be this show called $1 Million Movie, and they would show the same movie twice a night, and then 3 times on Saturday, 4 times on Sunday. And they happened to have the Orson Welles Shakespeare. They would show Macbeth and Othello. And I watched them every time I could. And I just thought they were beautiful, beautiful films. So photographically, I mean, I think I learned more. Then after that, I got lazy. I was never like this sort of cinema student that was willing to sit there and watch shot by shot and watch the intention of a shot and watch how the eye was being moved and watch the editing. I just was never disciplined enough once I got older. But watching those films over and over and over, the Welles films, I think I just remember, and I can still remember shots and angles. And I wound up stealing. Right? When we first made Night of the Living Dead, it's a very parasitic medium. And in those days, it was all on film. There was no videotape. And you had no chance to sketch or to get out and experiment. It's a parasitic medium. And so I think that in Night of the Living Dead, I mean, I think I owe a lot of the shots, the angles, the lighting, and everything to those 2 films, particularly Othello. And then I had an aunt and uncle that took me to see the Tales of Hoffman in a downtown theater at the Sutton Place in New York. And it's a fantasy film. I don't know how many people know this film. It's an opera basically, and they added some music, and it's so that they had a few more balletic sequences than if you go see the opera at the Opera House. There's not as much dance in it, but it's this beautiful fantasy film. It's about 3 unrequited. Hoffman has three love affairs, unrequited love affairs, and then there's a wraparound story. But it's a fantasy. He falls in love with a mechanical doll, and he falls in love with a woman who, you know, possibly is a vampire. And so it had those sort of horrific elements, fantasy elements to it, but it was just this beautiful, beautiful film. Each of the stories has its own sort of color palette, and it just sweeps you along, and there's not a word of dialogue. I mean, all it is the opera. It's all sung. It is sung in English. It was translated so that it's in English, but it's just this beautiful film, and it's the film that sort of made me want to make films. And it was very accessible. I mean, he had no money. Well, he and Pressburger, I guess Pressburger's the guy that didn't come up with enough money, his partner. But so they had to do things very simply. And it was transparent the way they were doing it. They were using double exposure and techniques that were visible. You could see how it was done. And I had the same uncle that took me to see that movie at the time had an 8mm camera, and he used to let me horse around with it. So I knew what a double exposure was. I knew that you could shoot in reverse in order to reverse action. And I saw these effects that Powell was using in this film, and I recognized them for what they were. And, you know, I think if I had, at the same age, seen Jurassic Park and seen those dinosaurs, I would have said, how did they do that? This, you could see how it was happening, and it made me feel that it was reachable, you know, that it was something that maybe I could do.
One of George's mystery about his films is that these films are very political, and they're always explicit about something, but they hesitate to draw conclusions. They kind of they're very thought-provoking, but it kind of refuses to the easy way out to say you should think of this, you should think of that. And it's interesting because several times he has defined them as cubist film, which, you know, is always trying to give this completely multiple perspective to whatever situation is discussing, so that you're not given a way to think, you're supposed to think it up yourself. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean when you say you think you film like cubist?
Well, I don't have necessarily conclusions in my own mind, and I don't know how, you know, I don't like white and black characters. All my characters are usually gray, and I like to look at things from a lot of different angles, not only the content, not only the thought process, but visually too. And in the earlier films that I made, I actually used to do, I mean, I would just cover everything, and I would have these different, even visual perspectives on things, sometimes even jarring.
You have a sequence in Martin that's very...
Yeah, there's a sequence in Martin. Martin is a film that I really love. It's a little film that I made called Martin, about a kid that is probably not a vampire. But I use that there. I mean, there's a sort of central sequence in that film, which I think is maybe the most successful sequence that I've ever done. But just because we had a lot of dedicated people, and you know, they were willing to stick around till 1 a.m. Wait, I need this one more shot. But it's about perspectives. I mean, just as the script doesn't try to point you in a direction or say this is right, this is wrong. Visually, I used to sort of dedicate myself to not doing the traditional, you know, not leading you, letting you look at what you want to look at, sort of.
Which is also why sometimes often you've said that you would like to work on 3D, and also you would like to use multiple screens to, you know, for your films.
Well, I'd love to do something like that. I don't know if I don't know if is viable. I mean, except in a very experimental way. I don't know that you could ever, you know, get somebody to support that kind of a project, because it's very hard to distribute that stuff. But I love 3D. I mean, I love, you go to Disney World and you see this, 3D presentation where, when they squirt water at you, they actually drop water on you. There are lighting effects around the theater. And I love that involved, complete involvement in a film. And I'd love to do something like that. I don't know how practical it is in terms of getting films distributed these days, but I'd love to give it a whack.
Since we're talking about the way you like to work, there is one movie that I don't know if it's very well known in Australia, but it's one of the George's least seeable or seen films that, and he's in this series with two other titles that are not dead movies, and the film is Night Riders, and I want to ask George to talk about Night Riders because not only it's a very odd film, it's a film about a group of is a traveling troupe of a traveling carnival was with a medieval theme, and they joust on motorbikes, and they live and stand by a very strict and important code of values, which clashes against what's going on in the world and where the world is going. And it, to me, is a metaphor of this carnival and the way they move and they work. It's a metaphor of the way George's work. So I would like you to talk a little bit about the film and why it was so dear to you.
I think in some ways it's maybe my most personal film. I mean, I think that I sort of relate to this group. I would like to live with that troupe of people. I've never sort of been a Hollywood guy. I much prefer to sort of work outside the system and work independently. And the central to this story is our characters that feel exactly that way. So it was quite a personal film, and it was really the first time we had a lot of adversity making that film. I mean, it was, we wound up shooting 92 days on what was supposed to be a 60-day schedule, and 80 out of those 92 days or whatever it was, 84 days contained rain. We had a little twister that tore the set apart, and it really just, on a very basic and deep level, it represents, to me anyway, what I've been trying to, that fight, of trying to remain independent, and the whole company just really pulled together on it, and it was first time that I worked with Ed Harris and some other really wonderful actors in the film, and everybody was just pulling to get it done, and it just made me realize how important that is. That the difference between making a film that way with everybody's cooperation and everyone loving the project and wanting to be there and wanting to pull for the same result, as opposed to sort of the Hollywood system, which is much more structured. There's the spontaneity comes out of it. I've made 3 studio films, and you can't just say, "Ooh, look at the sunset, let's get a shot of that." You have to write memos to get permission to do anything, and so spontaneity comes out of it, and and it's very hard to pull people together. Very often you need to have the studio's permission in order to use a director of photography, in order to use a composer, in order to, they have to be approvable. When I did Land of the Dead, I very much wanted to use a close friend of mine, Adam Swicka, who shot a film of mine called Bruiser, and then eventually shot Diary of the Dead. But I couldn't use him because he didn't have a Hollywood credit. And, same with a composer that I wanted to use, and so there's that structured system is just not fun. I couldn't use Tom Savini because he wasn't suable. He didn't have enough stuff, So they wanted me to use K&B. So Greg Nicotero, who did the sort of grandfathered the effects in Land, used to work for Tom, but he now is a member of this big company. It's one of the big Hollywood effects companies, so that's approvable. I don't enjoy well, the 3 times that I worked with inside that system, I didn't enjoy it very much. I prefer just, it's anathema, I think, to what the medium should be. I mean, you know, you were talking before about it, and my friends and I, when we first started our company and when we first made Night of the Living Dead, all of us could shoot, all of us could record sound, all of us could edit, all of us could light, all of us could read a light meter, you know. I mean, we sort of were sort of total filmmakers in that, if you want to call it that, in that way. And we wouldn't have had it any other way, you know. I wanted to know how it worked.
But you often said that if you could, you still would be writing, shooting, editing, and directing your own films. Is that true?
If I could, absolutely. I'd still love to do it that way. But you can't now. I mean, now I don't even anymore want to know how it works. Those machines, you know, all that electronic stuff, man, I go near it and it breaks. So I don't even want to, but it's also impossible. I mean, you come off the set these days, and you know, they want the film within weeks. It also, time has come out of it, the time to think about it, you know. And that was another thing about Diary. I mean, we had as much time as we needed to do the finishing work on it, and so much of Diary really fell into shape after we came off the set. There's narration in it, and there's news footage that we used to create this, you know, quilt of media, kind of a presence. And we had plenty of time. We had enough time to think about that, pick the stuff, and you know, play with it. And again, it's inside the studio system, man. You come off the set, and they want a rough cut in 2 weeks, and you know, there's just, you don't even have that thought time, thinking time to work on it.
Well, I think it's time to open it a little today to the audience.
Hey, George.
Hey.
Hey. Could
Who
you
are
sign?
you?
I'm Les.
Yeah, is that a movie?
Can you sign my copy of Knight Riders?
He's got Knight Rider. All right. Send it up. How you doing? Wait, I gotta. Let's take a question in the meantime. Otherwise, we'll be here for a while. I'm going to take this out, right? Who's it for?
Leslie.
L-E-S.
Okay, yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello, George.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for, I don't know what to say. I grew up on your films. My older brother used to sit me down and we used to watch everything, you know, and so I'm pretty much tormented in that. So thank you very much. And what do you think of your remakes, the remakes that come out of your pictures?
Well, haven't seen them. Thanks, Leslie. I haven't seen several of them. I saw the remake of Dawn, and I don't know. I think, you know, Zach's a really good action director. I thought the first 15 or 20 minutes were pretty hot, but it's an action film. I thought it more resembled a video game than it resembled anything of mine. But, and zombies aren't supposed to run, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Okay.
G'day, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Just out of curiosity, would you like to share with us some of your really funny stories that happened during filming, or, you know, or whether when you're on tour doing the promotion or something like that? Thank you.
On promotional tours? I don't know. Funny stories, not too, you know. Production is never that much fun, first of all. And out on tour, I don't know. No. The weirdest thing is the shit that people ask you to sign. Not like this guy.
Okay.
Hi, George. You covered it for a little bit a second ago. I just wanted to ask you in regards to, obviously there's a whole slew of zombie films coming out at the moment, and a lot of them seem to be crossing genres. There's a lot of, you know, comedy, romantic comedies, all those sorts of things. And obviously zombies keep getting quicker and quicker. I mean, what's happening with zombie films? Can you still make a scary zombie film? And if so, you know, what are the important elements that people need to go back to make sure that, you know, that sort of mythos is maintained?
I don't know where all these zombie films are. I mean, maybe we have a different situation in North America, but we're not seeing a lot of them. So I certainly don't see a lot of them, except films like I said, I have one in my pocket right now. There are a lot of young people and aspiring filmmakers who are shooting them. I don't know how many of them actually get into release. I think that the reason that when people talk about this zombie resurgence and that, you know, zombies rule now, it's not true at the box office. And in fact, I think production has been stalled on like Cell, Steve King's Cell, and even World War Z, because Hollywood's very suspicious of it, because they haven't been successful. I think it's much more video games that have kept zombies going.
George, for a guy who grew up loving Powell and Wells, has there been other projects you very much wanted to do but have found yourself typecast in the horror genre and you haven't been able to sort of get out of that?
Well, you know, it's all about guilty pleasures and what you loved when you were a kid, right? I mean, that at least with me, that's what it is. I still, most of the movies that I watch now are oldies. You know, I have a big collection of films, and I keep going back to watching those just to sort of, you know, reinforce whatever energies or passion that I have for the medium. I always watch the old stuff that I loved when I was a kid, at least the ones that hold up. They don't all hold up. But no, I never had any passions. But you know, growing up, I loved all the genre stuff tremendously. I'd love to make a Tarzan movie. You know.
That's what I'm saying. Have you found yourself typecast in the horror genre though, not being able to get to explore other genres?
No, I know, and I don't know. I mean, I'm at the age now where I'm probably, you know, not going to get invited. But I'm also what I've been able to do is get to a place where I can at least express myself a little bit and you know, throw some socio-political satire into the stuff, and I'm very comfortable with that. I mean, if I was doing, you know, Friday the 13th 6, I don't know that I'd be content, but I have this sort of gizmo, you know, where I can, you know, I joke sometimes and say maybe I'm the Michael Moore of horror, but you know, I have this sort of way of at least, even though I do sometimes feel trapped in it or typecast in it, I've found a way to make it work for me.
There's someone here who's been holding his hand for too long.
Okay.
This gentleman right there.
Okay.
George, so much of your material is so deeply Freudian in its nature. Oh, here we go. Thank you, there's always one. I'm sure I know a lot of people who've written essays on your films, theses from the point of view of psychoanalysis. But do you actually come from that content to sort of drift away on theory? Do you actually come from a psychoanalytic angle? Is it something that rises in your films and you recognize, or is it irrelevant? Duh! I've got the mic.
Yeah. No, but of course you know, I mean, we were all 60s, we were all children of the 60s, so, you know, especially in the early films, we would all just sit around, you know, talking about all that but we always tried to do the carnival ride as well, you know. I mean, and it's sort of it's always has been equally important, you know. Do the ride, and at the same time, you know, put some kind of a belly under it. But there has been a tremendous amount of over-analysis, I think, of some of the stuff. And a prime example, forget the Freudian stuff. I mean, even just political, you know, when we made Night of the Living Dead, I think probably the biggest single reason that people began to notice it and think of it as a more important film than even I think it is.
Excuse me, George. No, please don't do that because there is more sound. The more you get them closer.
Oh, okay.
But there is some other voices coming out here now.
It's,
Okay.
yeah. But, you know, I mean, we cast Dwayne Jones in the lead role. He was an African-American guy. All we did was not change the script. And the fact that he was black has become, you know, written about as though it was this amazing thing. And this is just a very simple example of the kind of thing that you're talking about there. I mean, the film was finished, and this is a true story. We threw it in the trunk of a car, and we're driving it to New York, the first answer print of that film, driving it to New York to show it to distributors. And in the car, on the car radio that night, we heard that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And all of a sudden, you know, that film took on that much more resonance. So, you know, the same things happened to that character when on the page we were thinking of him as a white guy. The posse came along and shot him. He got just as angry, you know. So that's an example of stuff that I don't think that, you know, we should take or I should take the credit for, you know. And you know, maybe we get a few points for being willing to cast an African American in a lead role, but you know, there's so much accident, and there's so much stuff that's been talked about, you know, from people have different perspectives on it. But basically, you know, the conscious stuff is the stuff that I tried to throw into it, I think, is obvious, or it was very obvious to me. In Dawn of the Dead, people talk about, you know, oh, this subtle thing about consumerism. It's not subtle, man. It's like right in your face. So, you know, and those are the conscious things, you know, the big broad strokes that this is what this film is about.
We have a question up the back, actually. That lady's been waiting a while.
Where are you?
She's right up the back.
Hi.
Okay. Hi.
Is that me? Oh. Hello.
I hope it's you.
Yeah, cool. A little bit nervous. People put you into a genre of being horror, but I've always kind of viewed you as being more of a critical genre, just being critical of everyday society and the consumer society that we now live in, etc. And now with things like the Walking Dead comic book related within zombies overtaking Earth and whatnot, I'm kind of wondering if there's a potential, in your view, for zombies to be portrayed past a critical point and more towards a acting in dissent point. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I suppose there is. In my films, the zombies are almost unimportant. I mean, that may sound very weird, but they could be any disaster. My stories are about the humans. I mean, and I guess that's real. I need to do that if I'm going to try to satirize society or what's happening, or a particular administration, which Land of the Dead, I think, owes much of its North American success to the Bush administration. But without those boys, nobody would have understood that movie.
And is your best critically received film?
What?
Is your film most acclaimed critically speaking, right?
Oh, in the States, yeah. It was the first time that people noticed that there was something underneath these, underneath, you know, that I was doing something more than just a pure horror thing. But I think, you know, I can thank, you know, Donnie Rumsfeld and the boys for that one. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry. In answer to your question, that wouldn't occur to me to try to do that, because it's sort of not part of my. It's not my pattern. It's not what I use the zombies for. You know, I just keep them in the closet and bring them out when.
I think We have time for very few more questions, and it is a few people here in the front that have been very patient.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I'd actually like to talk to you about your vampire film, Martin, which is my favourite film of yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank
And I have a copy of that here. You could sign as well if you wanted.
Okay.
But yeah, we've been talking
Well,
about zombies all night, and I love your zombie films. But Martin is it's a very poignant film, makes a lot of statements, and I'd just like to hear about what came to, like, what brought you to actually produce that film, and yeah.
Wow, that may not leave room for any other questions. I could that could do a few minutes on that, but I wanted to do something about. The film talks about a lot of different things, and at its center is the idea of different generations and the effect that beliefs and the mores of one generation affects another. And it's sort of stated in a very extreme way, using vampirism. I mean, he's got this, old grandfather or uncle who believes that the family carries the curse and believes in vampirism. And so has he been warped by that? Or, so I mean, at the center of those. But it also talks about media. I mean, he's very honest. He's constantly, he finds this talk show guy that he calls into all the time. And he's very honest about everything, even about his bloodlust and about his sexual desires and all of that. So maybe some of that flashes back to, I was raised Catholic, and so I know there are thematically some stuff in there. I in fact played a priest in the film because I just wanted to, not have. I wanted to basically say, blame me for this. Telling the church, hey, it's me, man. Very close to my heart, that film, and I feel that it's very often people say, what's your favorite film of yours? And it's very hard to judge it, to judge your films as, well, this is the best film, everything. You judge them for a million other reasons. The process of working on it, the people that you were working with, and your success, or what you think of as your own success in bringing it off the page and translating it onto the screen. And it's my favorite film of mine. So thank you for. Thank you.
Okay.
Julie, we got one more question.
One more question. Okay, I think it goes to him because he's been there for a while as well.
I'm going to take you to the marketing aspect of things rather than, delving into what you were thinking.
Right.
Are we going to see a box set of all 5 Dead movies?
Oh boy, I don't know. They're all controlled by different people.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately what happens, and trying to get those guys together, even to just talk about it, is tough.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I just thought it might have been nice to add to the collection. That's all.
Well, I wish that it could happen, but I think I doubt that it ever will, because there's Universal now. There's the Weinstein Company. There's it's just, and I don't think those boys. They don't play nice together.
I'm sorry, we really have to wrap it up because we're out of time. And I thank George, and I thank you, and to have come so many.
Julia. Thank you.